often come to places like this because, like millions of other people, I find them fascinating, and I love the atmosphere of the old branch line railways. For thousands of years, man has tried to recreate his surroundings, either through sculpturing, painting, or making working models, and railways are no exception. You can enjoy your hobby either as an individual, or as a member of a group, or perhaps even as a member of a club. I've been meaning to build another layout for a while. People keep asking me how it's done. OO's popular after all. Quite well detailed too, and strong. I fancy something to do with steam. Sensible, not too ambitious, or it'll never get finished. With a good deal of realism in the landscape. That ought to keep them happy. By using a good track plans book, we know they work and fit the baseboard, also the parts needed and what they'll cost. Of course, our trains will run on time. This one looks good, 8x4. I'll get a photocopy. There's plenty of sidings for storing trains, and with a few alterations, an area for landscaping. By removing the turntable, we can create some space for a village, and a branch line running round and up an incline to a country halt. All we need to do is reposition the points and level crossing. Now to make the board. Having made the big decision to go ahead and build our baseboard, we now have to consider the tools that we require. The list is not long. You'll need a mitre block, you'll need a small tenon saw, you'll need a tape measure, a pencil, a square, a hammer, a screwdriver, and if you're very lucky indeed, one of these electrically powered screwdrivers. We'll also need glue, nails and screws and bolts, but we shall go into that in more detail later on. There are a few other items you may find useful. Having assembled all our tools, we now have to consider the materials we're going to use. And this is the point at which a lot of people go wrong. They go out into their garage or garden shed and they rootle around and they come up with something like hardboard. Well, the trouble with hardboard is that it's very thin, it's difficult to drive nails into because it has such a hard surface, and it also is very noisy. You get this terrible drumming effect. So all in all, I wouldn't use hardboard. At the other extreme, we have chipboard. Chipboard has the same problem in that it has a very hard surface, it's difficult to drive nails into it and to get them to hold. And by the time you put it on a wooden frame, it becomes extremely heavy and very cumbersome. So I would discard chipboard. And having spent so much money on your layout already, why not go the whole hog and get something like Sundealer? It's nice and densely packed, so it'll hold the nails and whatever you want to fix into it. It's light, and also it's much quieter. You don't get this terrible drumming effect. So I would suggest that you go for this material. One of the other advantages of the material we have chosen is that it can be supplied in sections which are exactly a quarter of the size of our overall layout. So we can build it in 4 different sections. But in our case, because we're cutting out a well, it'll finish up with 5 sections. And I'm going to show you how we build this small section down here. Whatever material we decide to use is going to have to be mounted, and for that we would use 2x1 softwood and 50 by 25 millimeters. The reason for including the mitre box in our list of tools is that we do need good square joints. We are, after all, building the foundations of our layout, and if the joints are square, then the foundations will be sound. And there we have a good square joint, which fits nice and snugly. If you have a joint like this, you've got problems. The next move is to prepare them for screwing together. To do this, we use a pencil and one's finger. Position the tip of the pencil roughly in the middle, draw a line, turn your piece of wood round, draw another line, and then accurately position the tip of the pencil in the middle with your finger. You can then draw the accurate line across here, there, and there, and they mark the positions of the holes you're going to have to drill. And if you're working single-handed, you'll find a clamp like this very useful. It gives you another pair of hands. Screw it down nice and tight, and we're ready to start drilling our pilot holes. We've placed our wood over the edge of the table and drilled the pilot hole through both pieces with a 1/8 or 3mm drill. Countersink the hole and then drill a 3/16 or 5mm clearance hole for the screws, which are 2-inch number 8s with crossheads for non-slip drivers. And here is our frame, all screwed together, ready to have the board glued and pinned on top. This is PVA glue, which is easy to use, dries clear, and is very strong, and any excess can be wiped off with a damp cloth. So on goes the top, and it'll be fixed down every 6 inches or so with a flush-fitting lost head pin. And here is our finished board, and you'll notice that we've left a lip along here. That is so that later on, when we bolt all the sections together, we can put a stiffening rail which will run the full length of the board at both sides. And here we have one of the two largest sections, which is on its basic framework. And in this case, we have put in 2 additional supports to keep the top surface nice and flat, which will make the whole thing really rigid when it's all assembled. Drill through both frames together. This means the top surfaces will then be absolutely flat at the joints. If the board sections are likely to be separated often, the holes will need bushes inserted to stop the bolts enlarging the holes too much. And here we have our finished baseboard. The nice smooth surface, good and firm, and mounted at a convenient height on a pair of trestles. Because we can stand in the middle of our layout, we can either have it freestanding in the middle of the room, or we can tuck it into the corner and yet still be able to reach the whole board. There are other ways of supporting your layout. You might want to fix it to the wall and put 2 legs at the other corners. An alternative is to hinge it against the wall so that you can fold it up out of the way. But this is not as simple as it sounds, and I would suggest you read a suitable magazine or book on the subject. When laying the track, take care that the fish plates, which are quite sharp, enter the rails properly, because they do another job as well as joining the track. They each make an electrical connection. One poor joint and things will not run smoothly. Look for the arrows showing tiny recesses in the sleepers, which are slots for the power supply clips. It's important that the connections are in the correct place on the layout. This is another good reason for using a standard plan. Instructions are clear You don't need to be an electrician. Once we carefully fit the power clip under the rails, it's a good idea to make sure the rails are clean, by running over them with a rail cleaner. Then we can temporarily connect up. And remember to check that the mains plug is fitted with a 3-amp fuse. Incidentally, all types of available controllers have automatic cutouts, so they're completely safe in normal use. So get the feel of the controls, and let's have our first test run. Oh dear. Well, there's obviously a problem with this point, so we're going to have to remove it and investigate the cause of the trouble. This demonstrates very well the need for a test run. The problem seems to be that the power isn't getting from this piece of rail to this piece of rail. And if we look underneath, we find that there are little tags here, which are the electrical contacts. And if they're not pressing against this bottom rail, then there won't be a contact. So what we have to do is to very gently press them down. Not too hard or you'll break them. Just gently press them down. Make sure you can see it moving up and down, so now it's making contact with the rail. And whilst we're about it, we'll do the same for the other one. That's better. The laying of the track underlay is quite simple. The foam rubber is pre-formed, and as you lay it underneath the track, the sleepers fit neatly into the slots. And when you come to things like level crossings, then you use a slightly different underlay, which is a thinner, plain sheet. You cut them to size, and the same applies when you come to points. As you will remember, we said that we were amending the original plan slightly. This is to allow us to use this turnout to run into a branch line running in a gentle curve round here, and then up a nice gentle incline to a station halt at the back here. This will allow us to show you how to build an incline and the use of flexible track. When you start drawing up your own plans, you're going to be involved in large radius curves. And a simple way of achieving this is to get a piece of thread with a loop in the end and a pencil that you can poke through the loop, and then you can draw curves of any radius you like. When we come to the incline, we want a nice smooth entrance into the incline, giving us a nice gentle curve. We don't want a situation which gives us this. Having come round the curve, we've decided to start our incline here. And in order to get that nice gentle introduction into the incline, we're going to cut a flap in the baseboard. Having cut the flap, if we gently push it up, you'll see we have what we were looking for. Going on up the hill, we need a long straight edge, the length of the incline, to give us a template for measuring the piers that we need to support at regular intervals. And then we use the same straight edge to line them all up. Then we can place our board on top, and we can either glue the piers down or we can screw them down from underneath, and then we can pin and glue the board on top of the piers. Flexible track is supplied in lengths like this, and it is extremely versatile because you can do exactly as you would expect. You can bend it in all directions. One of the complications with flexible track is that when you come round a curve, one rail has further to go than the other, so you cannot join one piece directly onto the other. There's a cutting job to be done. Cutting the track is not quite as simple as it sounds, because if you try and saw it just like that, you will probably rip the rails out of the plastic sleepers. So it pays you to make a little wooden jig, piece of wood, and you cut out a piece to accept the base of the track. The other piece you cut 2 grooves to accept the rail, and then you can clamp the rail between the 2 halves of wood. And then, as you saw, everything's held nice and secure, and you won't rip any rail out of the plastic sleepers. The end sleepers are recessed for fish plates, and a clever way to keep them is to remove some sleepers further back down the line, and then slide the end ones on again. Now there's a smooth curve. Pin down a little bit at a time. That goes for fixing all our track. More fun, another test coming up. And this is the final piece of track going in with the foam already attached. The electrical connections to the track signal the end of our track laying, and we've drilled 2 holes in the baseboard so that we tuck the wires out of the way so they're nice and tidy. And now we come to the landscaping, where we can let our imagination run riot and bring the whole layout to life. All good ironmongers supply this type of fairly stiff wire, or you can use chicken wire to form the framework for our hillsides. It can be fixed down with pins bent over, or trapped between 2 pins, or stapled the hard way, or the high-tech way. It can also be a fence, and these boards are for our country station area. The bridge sides came from a plastic kit. Of course, you can design your own from anything. To make sure ours doesn't sag, we'll stiffen it by pinning pieces of rail to the sides to look like girders. It sounds daft, but make sure your trains don't hit it. Otherwise, you may have to convert it to a swing bridge later. Landscaping needn't always start with wire. Newspaper can often be quite sufficient on its own. The main point is, yesterday's news is being recycled into tomorrow's dreams. Irregular it may be, but so is the real world. Small strips of this material will form the outline surface of our landscape. And it's much easier to handle if it is cut into pieces, because it can be a bit messy. It's made of muslin impregnated with plaster, and when dipped in water for just a few seconds, becomes very workable and will take on any shape. But you have to be organized and work fast. After about 4 minutes, it begins to set. If you intend to make complex shapes and layer it neatly, then you have to get your skates on, or it'll be a hard luck story in no uncertain terms. This is only forming an outline, so don't worry about the Hessian effect for the moment. This part of the job can be quite time-consuming. You can't really hurry it very much. It's best to just add layers until you are satisfied with the shapes that appear. Don't worry if it all looks a bit rough and ready at this stage, full of ups and downs, almost unreal in places. Just remember that countryside is seldom flat. Now we fasten everything down. Having got the rough shape of our landscape, we now want to texture it. And to do that, we shall mix some modelling plaster with some powdered paint into a thick paste, but not making too much at once because it goes hard very quickly, and we want to paint it on with a brush. This is not the final colour, but acts as a base colour. By mixing small amounts of plaster at a time with different powder colours, we have a landscape in varying shades of green. The pre-coloured plaster fills in all the cracks and imperfections. As it hardens, we use a wet brush to smooth the final surface. It will be dry in about 2 hours. Plaster will fill all the gaps around the wall and the cork cliff face. The overall appearance of our layout is rapidly changing now. With colour all the way through, damaged chips don't show, and we save on a separate painting exercise. Then we highlight everything to make shadow effects, give a good impression of depth, and break up the overall colour. Next we sketch in the station area and various roads, which are very much a part of any landscape. It's best not to model roads like alpine passes instead of gently winding byways. Having had fun and games daubing paint all over the place, we now get down to some serious civil engineering. And the first thing we're going to tackle is the tunnel entrance. We've had to do a bit of surgery by taking two single tunnel entrances and joining them together. Then at the back, we've made two tubes out of some black paper to give the illusion of the train disappearing into a tunnel. Some scrap balsa covered with building paper makes cheap, effective walls. What always lifts our spirits is a forecast of blue skies. There's a wide variety of back scenes to choose from. These are probably the most popular. They all link together, so you have one continuous scene. And when you come to these awkward bits at the end, you can usually find some offcuts which you can use to plug that last awkward space. To improve back scenes, cut out pictures from different sheets and stick them in front of each other at different heights. Separate each layer by putting 3mm spacers behind, which will give an even more effective 3D look. You will probably have to cut holes in the back scene so that the track in the tunnels can be cleaned or any derailments dealt with. Some building kits clip together and come ready painted. Cutting out windows and other parts is simple. Others come as plain plastic, which have to be glued and painted. These are usually cheaper and more fun to assemble. These glue dispensers are handy. Everyone knows how to use decals. We have almost completed our branch line station area, and if you look carefully, you can spot a mirror, which will eventually convert half a station into a whole one. And now we come to the butchery department, where we have to cut things to fit. We've had to cut the end off this station building to get him to tuck in there, and we've taken a stand and edging shed and we've cut it to pieces and got two buildings for the price of one. And we've even used the scrap to make a third building to tuck in the corner there. A little colour and imagination creates magical scenes and opens the gates for further developments. Cocktail sticks or matches and real wire will stop anyone wandering onto the railway. Strips of card make suitable ranch fences. It's time to add some detail and begin the finishing touches. Use those cocktail sticks again and lichen to make realistic trees. If I'm not mistaken, it's growing. Now we furnish the railway yard, complete with the foreman's car. This ballast material is dry mixed with wallpaper paste powder. For economy, brush up any surplus which can be used again. It will be stuck fast after a shower of rain. 2 dessert spoonfuls of varnish, garnished with some scatter material, make an excellent recipe for a pond. Scenic dressings, sprinkled on wet PVA, will add texture and variety of colour, setting off the buildings against flowers and weeds. The big tree is made out of twisted wire. He knows his train times. He's missed his. She's decided to walk. Others have to work. And boys scrounge pocket money. Well, that's our project nearly finished. I think we've achieved something worthwhile with a touch of realism and some lifelike scenes that are really interesting, and we've enjoyed doing it. But more importantly, I hope that you now have the confidence to have a go yourself and start building your own model railway. Of course, a model like this is never finished. You can always find things to add to it. You might want to add this little telephone box to your pub. And you'd be surprised at what you can achieve with just using scrap materials. And talking of surprises, we have one more in store for you. We've built a swing shelf so we can use the controllers from the outside. And lo and behold, the builders, joiners and landscapers are back. Because at long last, we have received planning approval to build our long-awaited church. And so our well is filled in and becomes part of the landscape.